This episode is brought to you by Audi. The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV. It's a new way to experience driving. The all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron is here. The next chapter of Audi starts now.
Friends across Duck Country, Dr. Mike here, and a few comments before we dive into this week's very packed episode. Please go find the Wild Look Photography and support Matt Mezowitz. Matt is the Foul Weather Podcast Photographer of the Year and a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. A great young professional and amazing photographer. This week, we feature one of his great pictures of a shoveler as our thumbnail for the podcast. Second, find a few minutes to support your young entrepreneur, McKinley Dixon of Northern Latitude Foods. They were our guests last week on the podcast, and please do look up Northern Latitude Foods and order some wild rice using the 10% discount code FOULWEATHER2024. That's FOWL Weather, WEATHER 2024 as one word. Another one. I personally provided habitat consultation this year in collaboration with Ryan Delaney of Wildlife Strategies. Ryan is a proud graduate of the wildlife program at Mississippi State University. This year, I specifically consulted on 2 Wisconsin, 1 Ohio, and 2 New York properties. If you have interest in buying land and need to know if the habitat is right or could be managed for ducks, give me a shout. If you already have land and want to increase its value, give me a shout at Dr. Mike at foulweather.co. That's co, not .com. My schedule's really filling up for site visits next summer, so please do reach out as soon as possible if you have interest in a site consultation. But above all, think about it this way. We at the Foul Weather Podcast are supporting Matt, McKinley, and Ryan as the amazing professionals that they are. They're finding their way in a very competitive world. Look, I'm a teacher at heart. I walk into the classroom each day and aim for optimism, positive progress, and lift young people up so they can positively affect the conservation world around us. I couldn't be happier providing support for these 3 wonderful gentlemen, so please also find some time to support them. Thank you.
You are tuned in to the Foul Weather Podcast, the forecast to your next successful hunt. Coming to you from the home office, Jack's Reef, New York.
As we move into the hunting seasons and timing that duck movement starts, the Foul Weather Podcast team got thinking even more than normal about the timing of duck migration. We've also been seeing a lot of imagery on social media about tracks of GPS telemetry marked ducks, and along with some great conversation with friends across duck country, it got us thinking about what telemetry doesn't tell us. We cover this topic as well as some novel research showing that ducks make initial movements even prior to weather, but then their movements become increasingly about weather thereafter. Last, and we'd like to stop talking about why harvest restriction should not be the main lever to quote-unquote save ducks, but we will end by diving back into why it's actually a dangerous ticking time bomb of duck shooting rhetoric that, although well-intended, is likely to do more harm than good when talked about too much. We thank our every week listeners. You know who you are. Those that never miss a single migration forecast episode each Monday morning. We appreciate y'all very, very much. Y'all are as ate up as me about ducks, duck biology, and duck migration. You know where the ducks are at before the ducks know where they're at. Think about that. You know where the ducks are at before the ducks even know where they are at. Our dedicated weekly listeners can pick the best days to hunt because the Foul Weather Podcast forecasts fresh ducks hot from the north. Shoot the ducks from the north before they know where they're at. I'm your host, coming to you from the home office in Jack's Reef. Some of you have started traveling to hunt in the North Country, or maybe you put a smackdown on the teal or Canada geese. Maybe you haven't gotten into season too much yet and are simply waiting on that crisp fall air in the beginning of duck season that is a few months away. At the farm, we finally dug into the shelves of decoys. We're sorting out shotgun shells, mismatches, and what's left in our pockets from the end of last year. We've been training Jaeger, our 48-pound pocket lab, each morning, and we're thinking about our first duck hunts in the coming weeks. We actually got drawn for a local refuge hunt for opening day in New York, which should be spectacular. And we've been scouring the aerial photos and property maps for our prairie trip at the end of October. No matter where you are in duck country, though, it is definitely time to get the gear in shape and make a battle plan for the coming season. For a bit of fun listening, I do encourage my friends across duck country to go back to episode 17. That's episode 17, The Art of Skybusting, a satirical look at the bad habits of some duck hunters in the marsh. If you listened to it last year, man, it's still a good listen. Go back and give it another roll. Episode 17 of the Foul Weather Podcast, The Art of Skybusting. Another quick note on the tropical systems this week. That one that went up through North Carolina did dump a good amount of rain for folks in North Carolina, Virginia, but then it really slid east. I mean, we were up here at the farm even supposed to get a little bit of that water, but we didn't, right? Another quick note on the tropical systems that can influence our water management and wetland habitat for ducks so much, especially in these La Nina years like this one coming up. The orange blob on those hurricane maps, the orange blob in the southeastern Gulf of Mexico now has a 70% chance of cyclone development in the next 7 days. And remember, that is as of our recording on Sunday. So we recorded this yesterday. The models are pretty consistent that it's going towards the panhandle of Florida, with landfall looking at like sometime this week around Thursday or Friday, with a lot of people saying a good likelihood of it even being more than a Category 1 hurricane. But keep an eye on the Foul Weather Podcast Facebook page for updates throughout the week, because these things have kind of a evolution of their own sometimes and do make some twists and turns that we don't expect. I'm supposed to be in South Carolina for a waterfall and wetlands meeting Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, but we'll see how that system develops and where the models say it's going. This might be a Zoom meeting after all. Also remember next week that we will be producing our first of many duck migration forecasts, which run through the end of January, so be sure to tune in. All right, so let's jump right into answering that question. When do ducks start to migrate, and maybe even why? The answer isn't as simple, as it started to get cold like one might think. First, let's think about the end of the breeding season and what happens with adults and juvenile ducks. First, some adult males, once done breeding, will migrate hundreds of miles north, even more, 1,000 miles north. Think about it. How many male mergansers do you see in the summer once hens start incubating? You typically don't, right? And common mergansers, say that nest along rivers, hooded mergansers that nest in beaver ponds, males make these massive movements north. Our own Josh Stiller, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation waterfowl biologist, studied common mergansers that use trout streams and rivers in southeast New York for his master's degree at ESF under the guidance of the late Dr. Guy Baldessari. What he found with implanted telemetry units was that the male mergs in this system traveled, I'm just going to say, over 1,000 miles. The exact number actually is 1,108 miles on average to James Bay, the little bay south of Hudson Bay, from southeast New York to spend the summer and molt their feathers. This is an extreme case, but many of our male ducks, once done with their breeding duties, make movements to molting areas to spend the summer. This leaves hens and broods on the breeding grounds with reduced competition with males for food. Now, once ducklings hatch, the hen must spend time tending to them. This often leaves her in pretty rough shape, right? Tending to more to making her young be well fed and watching over them than her own feeding during the summer. So the late summer and early fall is a very important period for hens to put back on protein before the migration south. Hens that fail at nesting can tend to themselves and survive the next hunting season at a substantially greater rate than those that actually succeed at nesting and raising a brood. So thinking about protein and producing more, kind of permanent bodies of water with insects for hens to feed on is likely very important during the late summer and early fall period as they make their first movements off of breeding areas. Also think about ducklings that have never seen a stick of barnyard grass seed, or for that matter, any other carbohydrate-rich wetland seeds. They've basically been living on bugs for months. So juveniles are also looking for these same resources as hens, likely much farther into fall than many think. Okay, Dr. Mike, what does this have to do with migration? Well, if you think about ducks produced in areas with relatively low productivity wetlands, or lower productivity wetlands than the prairies or Great Lakes lake plain regions or other fertile areas we think of as great duck stopover locations, well, like the prairie, parkland, or boreal forest, these areas that we know are less productive, right? They can't produce as many ducklings per unit area. That's because they produce less food in the form of bugs, but they also don't tend to produce those super productive moist soil seed-filled wetlands. They don't even really have those huge expanses of perennial wetland plants like rushes and sedges in most places, like those southern latitude marshes do. So the parkland region and the boreal forest, the productivity is generally lower than the prairies and these more, think about them, agricultural landscapes, right? So when ducks can leave these areas that are of lower productivity, they just do. They start to move into places where carbohydrates are more abundant. At these areas, they bulk up, and then weather starts to be a bigger factor. So why is Saskatchewan such a good bet this time of year? Just that. These ducks are moving into more fertile areas, out of the boreal, out of the parkland, and into the prairies. And then, in the east, why at Long Point on Lake Erie in Ontario can you shoot just about every species of dabbling duck on the opening day of duck season on the third Saturday in September? Same reason. These birds are moving out of an area they have no way of staying the winter, that is lower soil fertility, lower food abundance, and into an area with better food resources.
Halliday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy! Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere! And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Halliday! Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Halliday! Halliday, bring it on!
Again, then they tend to stay at these locations until weather thereafter makes them move, and after that, their jumps from one place to the next tend to be very, very dependent upon weather. From our own lab at ESF, we had a student, Kayla Harvey, who is now back home as a waterfowl biologist for the great state of Maryland. Kayla used stable isotope analysis of feathers to determine if we were banding mallards that had already made these types of movements into New York during the preseason banding period, which for us is typically kind of August through September. First, a bit more kind of about stable isotopes and stable isotope analysis, because that might be kind of a new idea to some folks here, right? When a duck grows its feather on the breeding area, it incorporates water molecules into those feathers that are representative of the ratio of heavy to light hydrogen. Let's call it deuterium. That deuterium, because of differences in precipitation from south to north on the continent, well, it produces a predictable gradient from north to south, providing a rough estimate of the location that duck grew that feather, incorporating that ratio of heavy to light hydrogen or deuterium into that feather. So when we caught ducks throughout New York, it was estimated that about 50% of the mallards we were banding were actually from Canada. That is, during their flightless period, or when they were ducklings growing those feathers, they were doing so in Canada and not New York. Some were likely even coming from as far north as the latitude of the Ottawa River Valley between Ontario and Quebec. People still find this surprising and question it, but at the same time, during that same time of year, we have green-winged teal, pintails, and widgeons showing up, and they don't typically breed in New York. So why wouldn't mallards also be making movements during this August to September period? It's kind of how we started on it, kind of showed what we thought was going on. We were just trying to understand what those proportions were. It was pretty substantial, as to how many ducks were moving out of Canada and into New York to be banded during that period. So when we talk about harvest derivation, or where did ducks come from that we shot with bands, we should probably be not saying they originated from those locations, but that they were banded in those locations, because once they can fly, we cannot be sure that they came from that exact location. So when do ducks start migrating? I'd say it's whenever they are ready, but by mid-August, there is really likelihood of substantial movements starting to begin southward. So my friends, duck migration has definitely already started, so time to get ramped up for the duck season. On the other side here, we take some hard-hitting looks at telemetry and what it can't tell us. So please, stick with us. Look, folks, the Farmland Group across the Mid-South is your one-stop shop for real estate brokerage, consulting, management, lending, and appraisals. If you own land or you want land, the Farmland Group is where it's at. With over $500 million in farm sales and growing, Gwynn and Shelby Smith have you covered. Look, if you're thinking about buying or selling, contact the Farmland Group to access their full suite of services. If you already own property and want to build equity and value, the Farmland Group gets it done. If you're looking to purchase a new property, well, they get that done too, and they have access to some of the best lending available. Looking to sell? Get it appraised with a Farmland Group affiliated appraiser. But let's be clear for our listenership too. They also offer farm and hunt property management to create places that attract more ducks and more bucks. Who doesn't want that? More ducks and more bucks. Let the Farmland Group build value into your property. Find them today at farmlg.com. That's farmlg.com. You're not going to be disappointed. Contact Shelby Smith today at farmlg.com and let him know that the Foul Weather Podcast sent you their way. All right, let's jump into this telemetry discussion. Telemetry, and specifically GPS telemetry, has become a super sexy technique in the duck research world. It really has the potential to unveil patterns we've never been able to test for previously. It gives us this amazing visual that we can post on social media and use, as a fundraising tool. But rest assured, we've never seen a social media graphic of, oh, well, here's a bird that crashed and shit the bed. I'm going to take a poke at telemetry a little bit, poke a few holes here, because as hunters, we seemingly just eat this stuff up without thinking about, what does it actually tell us. But I also want to assure you that I'm going to have guests this year on the Foul Weather Podcast to discuss how I am wrong about my comments as well. I'm going to chat with folks that have placed a lot of these GPS telemetry units on these birds and have this discussion of what works and what doesn't. So, we all work into this with a balanced conversation. Don't take anything here as an all-out criticism of GPS telemetry. Along with students, I've used it myself and published on implants and diving ducks and backpack transmitters on mallards and black ducks. So I certainly see the utility to answer difficult questions. But I've been thinking a lot about what it doesn't tell us. Likely, the most obvious and important things telemetry doesn't tell us is what juvenile ducks coming out of the north are doing. This is really important for duck hunters to understand, because on certain years, juveniles very much outnumber adults in the population, and more importantly, these juveniles contribute substantially to harvest because they're dumb, they're naive. And when there's a good hatch, like we hope happened with re-nesting effort this year, and we get a weather event to push them south into a place they've never been, then our shooting can be off the hook. I'd actually argue that the migration forecasts that we do weekly on the Foul Weather Podcast are better predictors of the potential for hunting success than complex habitat models produced by GPS telemetry. But I'm just going to leave that there until we talk with one of our friends more heavily about this that's well embedded in the telemetry world. Second, we can't track dead ducks, so think about that. So in years when you are putting telemetry units on ducks, even if you put them on into the season as ducks arrive, you are inherently and increasingly putting them on ducks that have seen it already. They've seen it all and know where the safe space is at. And in a year with many, many more adult ducks in the population, like the past 5 years or so, then you increasingly have a non-killable population tagged that you are monitoring. Even if you tag a duck that recently showed up, it survived that first movement into your area. It wasn't killed as a flight duck coming out of the stratosphere into your spread. Hey, I hunt flight days because I use the Foul Weather podcast to pick my best days to hunt. So I shoot a lot of ducks coming from high up and into the spread. I like shooting ducks whose feet haven't ever touched local water yet. So you also aren't likely tracking those birds, even if they are adults. So flight birds are not in these data sets, which in my opinion is kind of a huge hole in these data if we are trying to think about how duck movement influences duck hunting success. Think about it this way: when there are a lot of juveniles in the population and ducks rain down from the north on a cold and snow event into the big woods of Arkansas, into the coastal North Carolina wetlands, into a Colorado River or a big Oklahoma lake, no telemetry unit is telling you that is happening. None. Not a single one. Now remember, I just said juveniles. There are adults that we can follow during these periods. But there's a lot of juveniles in the population, right? When that happens and ducks rain down on you from the north, that telemetry data that's out there is not telling you anything about that event happening. Now, on the flip side, on the years like last year, that telemetry info may be more indicative of what you are seeing because the productivity's down, because the prairies are dry. There's very, very little weather, very, very few flight days at all. And more of the ducks in the population, they were adults. But on the bumper crop years of 1999 and kind of anywhere between 2012 to 2017 when we were above 10 million mallards, well, then migration of juveniles likely swamped anything that telemetry of local marked ducks could have told you about how that was going to affect your hunting success. So while the telemetry work will tell you about how ducks use the landscape, it can only tell you about ducks that are alive. Kind of the only way maybe to get this right, the only way to really understand how these juveniles are acting and how it influences what areas they use and how they survive would be to tag an abundance of kind of fresh ducks before they get to a location. You know, specifically those juveniles at stopover locations with the hope you might have enough ducks end up, from that area into a given area to have confidence in those results. I mean, that's a tall task. It's probably why nobody's done it. Last, and there are good people working on this topic, not all ducks are built the same, and some just don't do well with telemetry units. So yeah, you can compare the marked sample to banded ducks to look at harvest rates and where bands were returned, right? Kind of compare the marked sample of telemetry tag birds to a banded sample, but that doesn't get the overall behavior, right? Nest attendance, how many of these nest, etc., and what effect that backpack kind of has. Mostly the hard work on these projects has to be done on the front end because so many use GPS telemetry units. This is my opinion, okay? So many folks use GPS telemetry units as the hammer. Or said another way, instead of thinking about eloquent ways to answer the same question, instead we go with the sexy way with the backpack because we can raise funds around that and sell that to the hunting public because we push these visuals out. The reality is that we really need to ensure that the questions we have can actually be answered. And not just answered, but answered well without so much bias that they actually produce harmful information that heads us down the wrong path of conservation or harvest management path. So I'll leave that there. We likely just need to think harder about what telemetry does not tell us. It definitely has utility, and I will again likely use GPS telemetry in my own studies. For now, I've kind of taken a step back from it and watched how this large amount of information kind of progresses and trying to understand what biases might be out there and follow the research of people that are testing the utility of telemetry units and what it can and cannot tell us. Up next, some final thoughts on why words can be ticking time bombs, so please stick with us. Hold on, folks, don't turn that channel. We've got some really exciting news for you. The Foul Weather Podcast has teamed up with Wildlife Strategies. That's right, I'm now working directly with Ryan Delaney of Wildlife Strategies to build value into your land. Wildlife Strategies is already known for quality wildlife habitat management, be it deer, turkeys, ducks, or whatever you pursue. Ryan knows his stuff. Look, I don't add my name to just any business, but I believe in what Wildlife Strategies is doing for landowners throughout the Southeast U.S. and beyond. If you want science-based solutions to create great wildlife habitat, Wildlife Strategies is your best bet. If you're interested in ducks, when we say, may your skies be filled, well, Wildlife Strategies does just that. They fill your skies with ducks. Contact Ryan Delaney today at ryan@farmlg.com for a site visit. You won't be disappointed you did. Ryan covers the southern tier of states, and I'm available to build habitat management plans across the northern tier. Contact us today for a quote. The Wildlife Strategies team sees your property through from the initial assessment and development of a 3-year time frame management plan through annual check-ins and course corrections as needed. Contact Ryan today at ryan@farmlg.com or Dr. Mike at foulweather.co. You won't be disappointed you did. Fill your skies with ducks and your forests and fields with deer and turkey with Wildlife Strategies. Okay, and we are back on track with the Foul Weather Podcast. I'll be brief here because if you've been listening, it is abundantly clear to our listeners that tweaks to season lengths and bag limits is going to do little to quote-unquote save the duck population. But last episode, we noted how these changes may actually negatively affect rural economies and even conservation dollars that are used to protect and restore duck habitat on the prairies and beyond. Today, I want to go a step further, again just briefly, because I think folks that are alarmist people that are calling for restrictions on seasons, especially for mallards, are possibly creating a ticking time bomb. Remember that duck season officially closes in perpetuity every year until the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and partners can provide that population, those populations of ducks, can sustain harvest. Then, through a very detailed process that includes waterfowl surveys, breeding habitat surveys, and adaptive harvest management modeling, we can put forth a framework through the Federal Register that is then accepted with state involvement, and we get a duck season going forward for another year. Poking holes in the institution of waterfowl surveys, adaptive harvest management, and other data streams is not just a way to maybe, bend the masses into thinking the process and the science of duck management is in bad shape, which it is not. It is a ticking time bomb for people that don't even want duck hunting to exist. It's a ticking time bomb that may go off with the antis in charge. Tearing down the institution of waterfowl management in the U.S. and Canada that has worked and been improved upon over the ages. A waterfowl survey that is the envy of the world, the largest collaborative banding operation and harvest information program that exists in the world. Tearing all that down, it's irresponsible. And in my opinion, it's setting us up to be holding a ticking time bomb. Be good, my friends across duck country, and remember, even well-intended but misdirected actions by a community of passionate duck hunters can actually do the opposite of what it is intended. Let's stick by the science. Let's lift people up to help them do the best work possible. Let's work to fund the heck out of the what's generally defunded Office of Migratory Bird Management. Critique is fine. I do critique too. But let's help our good people looking out for the ducks across duck country do the best job they can. Let's help them do the best job they can. Remember, these folks that work from academia through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and with all these state agencies are literally in the wetlands, fields, and forests right beside us, right beside you. And they go to work each day doing the best work possible for the ducks and all the great people across duck country. So let's be careful with our words. The same goes for me. And I am. I am critical when I feel like it's necessary. But the institution, the system, the process of waterfowl surveys, habitat surveys, harvest models, it works. It protects the resource. And my opinion is that we will shoot them through the bottom. Ducks are on the rise. History's with us. They've done it before, and they're going to do it again. The alarmists came out at every single bottom of the duck population we've ever gotten. When I was in Maine, this is where one of these lessons came from. When I was in Maine, when our grouse population, our ruffed grouse population was at the bottom. And my goodness, we knew this was a predator-prey cycle, right? And that grouse would rebound. We did public meeting after public meeting with the commissioner of the wildlife department there to talk to the citizens, the concerned hunters of the state of Maine. And the idea was that when the population gets that low, you ain't shooting the last grouse. And our models now for waterfowl say the same thing. I mean, we ain't shooting the last duck, for goodness sakes. We're not driving ducks to the bottom where we'll end up with closed seasons because of shooting. Let's not give the antis information that says that the reason the population of ducks fluctuates is because of guns. It's habitat, and it's gonna come back. The tiny tweaking, nuances, barely do anything. So be good, my friends across duck country. Thanks for listening, and as always, may your skies be filled, and shoot straight, my friends.